Four words. That's all it took to break my brain a little. Silo 1 monitors every frequency. Bernard says it in episode 5, half burned, hiding in a hole, talking to the one person in Silo 18 who still trusts him. And he says it like it's nothing, like it's a fact he's been sitting on for years, because he has been. But if you actually stop and think about what that sentence requires, it stops sounding like a throwaway line and starts sounding like the biggest reveal this show has given us since Juliet found a body outside the wall. Because monitoring isn't something a machine does by accident. Monitoring is a job. Somebody has to be doing it. Today, I want to dig into who or what is actually sitting in Silo 1. Not by guessing, not by pulling something out of the books to spoil your show, just by taking everything Silo has already put on screen, lining it up, and asking what it actually adds up to. And along the way, I'm going to bring in what's happened since this theory started making the rounds, because episode 5 changed the math in a way a lot of people haven't fully clocked yet. Stick around because by the end of this, I think you'll watch the algorithm room completely differently. Let's start with something the show buried in plain sight back in season 2. Lucas Kyle decodes Salvador Quinn's letter and learns the truth. The founders didn't build one silo, they built 51. Bernard corrects him on the number himself. 50 of them are living quarters. The 51st is different. It watches the other 50, and it has the authority to end any of them. Now notice the numbering. It's not called the hub. It's not called control. It's Silo 1. Whoever designed this system counted it the same way they counted 18, or 17, or any of the others. That's a strange choice if the place is just server racks and cooling fans. You don't usually put a machine room at the top of a list of homes. You do that when the thing at the top of the list is also a home. Just a very different kind of home, for a very different kind of resident. Keep that number in your head because it's going to matter again later. Season 2 also gives us our first real contact with whatever runs this operation, and it's worth slowing down on how that scene actually plays out. Lucas follows Quinn's instructions to the bottom of the silo, wades through water nobody's ever measured the depth of, and finds a tunnel that shouldn't exist. At the end of it, a vault door. And before he says a word, a voice greets him by name. Sit with that for a second. Nobody told this voice who was coming. Nobody radioed ahead. A man who had never set foot down there in his life gets identified instantly, the moment he's standing in the dark outside a sealed door. Then the voice tells him only 3 people have ever made it this far in the entire history of the silo. It names them. Across more than a century, a machine can absolutely keep a database. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that this thing recognizes individuals it's never physically met, remembers relationships between them across generations, and reacts like it's picking up a conversation it's been having with humanity the whole time. That's not a lookup. That's a memory. And the aftermath tells you just as much. Bernard, a man who has run this silo for years and knows where every body is buried, comes back from a meeting with this thing and resigns on the spot. Whatever's behind that door doesn't just give orders, it changes people. Here's where I think the show has been quietly showing its hand for 2 full seasons, and almost nobody talks about it, because it's buried in scenes that look like routine exposition. Watch how the voice actually operates when Camille brings it a problem. In one exchange, she pitches a plan to let Juliet run loose and use her to flush out other threats, instead of drugging the entire population back into compliance. The voice doesn't process that request. It argues with it. It tells her that chasing 2 uncertain outcomes isn't worth it when one method already has a track record of working. That's not an output. That's a person in a meeting, weighing a subordinate's proposal against something they've personally seen succeed before and saying no. Then there's the choice of who runs Silo 18 in the first place. Robert Sims was the obvious pick. Head of security, Bernard's own handpicked successor, a career of loyalty behind him. The voice looks at all of that and picks his wife instead, specifically because of her talent for deception. That's not a security clearance. That's a character raid. Somebody evaluated Camille as a person and decided exactly what kind of person she'd be useful for. And then there's the camera. When Lucas first hears the voice boom out of the wall, the show frames it like the Wizard of Oz, which is not a subtle reference if you know how that story ends. Later, in a scene with Camille, the camera actually cuts to what looks like the voice's own point of view, watching her from the other side of the wall. The show isn't shooting a server, it's shooting a presence, something looking back. Since season 3 started, there's been a running argument in the fandom about whose voice is actually coming through that speaker. Some viewers are convinced it's a specific actor's voice underneath the processing. Others hear someone completely different. The debate hasn't settled, and it's been weeks. Normally, that kind of disagreement fades once enough clips get compared side by side. This one hasn't. And I think that's actually a clue, not a coincidence. Because Silo 1 has apparently been running this operation for well over 100 years, monitoring 50 communities, authorizing corrections, and deciding when a silo has to be shut down for good. That is not a job for one person across multiple lifetimes. It's a job for an institution, a rotation, different people, on shift, speaking through the exact same processed interface, so that Camille hears the same authority this month that she heard last month, no matter who's actually sitting in the chair. There's some real-world context that fits this theory a little too well. Showrunner Graham Yost has talked openly about how much time the writers decided to spend inside that algorithm room this season, specifically because of how good actress Alexandria Riley is in scenes where Camille is essentially just talking to a wall. Yost has said the whole storyline expanded because her performance made those conversations worth watching. Which tells you the writers know exactly how much weight is riding on this relationship, and that it's being treated as a relationship, not a technical support call. If that's right, then Camille isn't negotiating with a program. She's negotiating with whoever's on duty. A colleague she's never met, who's decided her entire community is a case file, and who can change tone, patience, and mood depending on which person is behind the glass that week. Now, here's the part that's actually new, and it complicates this theory in a way I think makes it stronger. Episode 5, titled Memory, aired at the end of July, and it rewired a huge chunk of what we thought we understood about the people running things inside Silo 18 itself. Bernard, who everyone, including Camille, believes died in the fire, is actually alive, hidden in the digger void, being nursed back to health by Martha. And the man who supposedly let him die, Robert Sims, turns out to be the one who secretly saved him, cutting air holes into the plastic sheeting instead of finishing the job Camille ordered. That's a big deal on its own. But here's the detail that matters for our theory. Bernard reveals the existence of something called the Order, essentially a companion document to the Pact, written specifically for the head of IT and their second in command. It contains rules about handling people who've been dosed with memory-suppressing drugs, including keeping them away from personal objects that could trigger a memory to resurface. That's not the kind of contingency you write for a piece of software. That's the kind of procedure you write because you know from experience that human minds are unpredictable, and you've had to manage that unpredictability before. In other words, the deeper we get into the machinery of this show, the more of it turns out to be paperwork. Committees, successors, rules written by people, for people, to manage other people. Camille is formally named Bernard's successor by the algorithm itself in this episode, the exact same way Bernard was presumably named by someone before him. That's a chain of custody. Machines don't get succession plans. Institutions do. And Martha's radio, the device Bernard warns her to use sparingly and in code, becomes fully operational in this same episode. She's not just picking up static anymore. She's monitoring actual chatter from other silos. Which means the show has now put a working line into the rest of the 51 silo network directly into the hands of characters we're following, and given us a specific, on-the-record reason to be nervous about who might be listening on the other end. There's one more piece of evidence, and it doesn't come from inside the story at all. It comes from how the people making the show are describing it. Graham Yost has said directly that the Before Time storyline in Season 3 is built as a political thriller, and he's named his influences out loud. 3 Days of the Condor, The Parallax View, that specific strain of 1970s paranoid cinema about ordinary people discovering that the world is being quietly run by people they'll never see, operating through institutions built specifically to stay invisible. That's not a random genre choice. Those movies aren't about rogue computers. They're about bureaucracies, shadow committees, career professionals doing something horrifying and calling it policy. If the creative team is deliberately borrowing the visual language and tension of stories about human conspiracies and applying that same language to Silo 1, that's about as strong a signal as you're going to get without an actual on-screen confirmation. The show is speaking in the dialect of human conspiracy, not machine malfunction. So here's where I land. I don't think Silo 1 is a server farm with a good text-to-speech engine. I think it's a staffed institution, running on a rotation, following procedures written across more than a century, managing 50 populations the way a case management office manages a caseload. Cold, consistent, and occasionally cruel. Not because it lacks feelings, but because whoever's speaking is required to sound like the system, no matter who's actually on shift that day. Season 3 is explicitly built to answer this. Apple has already confirmed the show ends after one more season, Season 4, which will wrap up the trilogy for good. That means the writers know they have a finite amount of time to either confirm or completely dismantle everything we've just walked through. Watch how many chairs are in that room whenever the camera finally takes us inside Silo 1. Watch whether the voice ever slips. A word choice that doesn't match last week's tone. A flash of impatience that gives away a shift change. And watch that radio Martha built. The same device that finally lets three people talk in secret inside Silo 18 is, according to Bernard himself, capable of ending all 51 silos at once if it's ever pointed the wrong way. For 3 seasons, this show asked what's outside the wall. I think the real question was always what's above it, and who decided the rest of us don't get to know. That's my read on it, but I want to hear yours. Is it one voice down there, or several taking turns behind the same wall? And if you think it's several, who do you think we've actually already met without knowing it? Drop your theory below. I read every one of them. If this kind of breakdown is your thing, subscribe. Because once that camera finally goes past that vault door, we're going to have a lot to unpack. See you in the next one.